Hey folks, this is Vint with Dad's Gaming Addiction, and once again, we're going to talk about Heroes of Hammerwatch 2. Specifically, we're going to look at the Ranger today. I recently released a video about the Warlock, and I'm going to say the same thing that I said in that video. This is not a complete, comprehensive, you must do this in order to win guide. That's not what this is. Like my Warlock video, I'm going to show you what the Ranger can do, what its specializations are, and what I recommend for the class. But just because I recommend it doesn't mean you should do it. I don't have this game like mathed out to a science, and my playstyle may be different than yours. I encourage you to find your own playstyle and to try out different things and see what works for you. In this video, you're going to be seeing what I do with the Ranger when I play it. Alright, so let's go ahead and start with weapons. What weapons would a Ranger typically run? Now, there are three different choices here. I mean, yeah, there's more, but primarily there's three that people would consider. There's the main hand dagger or sword, and then an offhand crossbow. That's what I use. That's what I prefer. Because reasons. I'll get into that a little bit later. Another option is your bow. It's a two-handed bow and takes the place of both of these slots. Both of them require dexterity to use. Now, you could try a two-handed crossbow, but you'll note that I can't equip it because it requires strength. I actually use the two-handed crossbow on my Tyrant Warrior. That's an interesting combination. But anyway, primarily, if you're going to be putting a lot of points into dexterity, which is the recommended trait or attribute, then you're going to have a choice between a bow and an offhand crossbow. Typically, that's what you're going to have. But, you know, if you're one of those people that like to throw points elsewhere, you might have the strength necessary to run a two-handed crossbow. You know, you could try it. I haven't done that. Now, keep in mind, everyone is going to have a different opinion about crossbows and bows. And I think my answer to this is it depends on what specialization you're going to be running and how healthy your wrist is. So we'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about specializations. As far as the recommended attributes, I would focus on dexterity and vitality. And if you're going to be using the Warden spec, which we'll get into in a little bit, I would maybe consider stacking a little bit more into vitality, and we'll explain why that is in a little bit. But I say dexterity because that will cover your spell power. That's where your spell power icon is. So all your skills are going to be based around dexterity typically. You've also got weapon crit chance and weapon crit damage lumped along with that. So I think dexterity is super important along with vitality. Enchanting, as I've stated before, can be a bit expensive, and trying to keep up with all 7 classes is a bit rough. Unless you're one of those people that, like, you know, have one set of gear for your wizards and your sorcerers and the like, and you have one set of gear for your melee classes and so on. Then it's a little bit easier because there's less gear to enchant. But in my case, I don't typically do that. Now, I would recommend a couple of different enchants here, and it all depends on what spec you are. Again, this whole video is going to be, it depends on what spec you're running. And we'll get into why that is later. If you're going to be running spell power stuff, like if your build or your spec is heavy on spell power, then you're going to want this powerful enchant. That gives you your spell power that you'll need. And again, some of this I'm not going to bother like enchanting. If you have a choice of like of stunning or of draining, you know, I typically leave those there because I'm going to be getting better gear at some point anyway. I typically only enchant the main attributes that I'm looking to improve. If it's like a choice between stunning or, you know, restore 1 health on hit, or maybe sundering isn't bad if you can afford it. Sundering is kind of nice, especially if you're running like a Beastmaster class or something. But yeah, I mean, I typically don't stress too much about this because I know better gear is coming. But if you're going to run some kind of spell power build, then you're going to want the powerful tag typically. And I would also recommend vitality, because if you're running Warden, you'll see how that will scale later on. Now, here's the thing. Some of you folks love your bow, and that's a main hand weapon, and that requires weapon damage. So if you don't mind clicking out the wazoo, then you may want to consider something that's going to give you like weapon damage or something like that. And off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you what that is. Here's one. Weapon power. So maybe consider mighty as a keyword. So you're going to have a choice really between spell power and weapon power. And as of right now, the way this game works, typically spell power is favored over weapon damage. It just is. Like, just spell damage, for whatever reason, reigns supreme. It's very difficult for classes to get ahead with weapon damage. But if you want to spec your character around your main attack, then consider the mighty. And you're going to want to do this probably with your Marksman spec. But any other spec, I would say spell power is the way to go. When it comes to magic shops and orb upgrades, the ones I would give priority to, there's Big Game Hunter. You deal additional damage to bosses and elites afflicted by Mark. That's through your main ability, so you'll have that through no matter what spec you are. And likewise, the same thing. Killing enemies inflicted by Mark has a chance to restore some of your health and mana. Thrill of the Hunt. If you're not running the Warden spec, then you're not going to really have a whole lot of self-healing. The Warden has an Entangle ability, and one of the upgrades for that are Wisps that will heal you for, I believe, a percentage of your health. And it's not shown here because I'm currently Marksman right now, but it would be listed here if I were Warden. So Thrill of the Hunt for the mana and health regen, and then you've got Big Game Hunter. I think those are the two big ones that you'll want to look at. But also, if your bows, like if you're going to focus heavily on your main weapon attack, then In the Flow is not bad. Each stack of rhythm increases your weapon speed. So anything to increase your main hand damage is really good. So I would consider In the Flow as well if you're a Marksman. If you're looking for a bit of survivability, this whole evasion for the duration of the buff, that's not bad. Some of these other ones I'm not too crazy about. Quick Recovery also isn't bad for survivability reasons. And if you're not the Warden, then you may want to consider Quick Recovery as well as Evasive Maneuvers for more defensive leisures. But everything else is spec specific. And if I were just to comment on like the basic skills, Thrill of the Hunt, Big Game Hunter, In the Flow if you're running bows, and then for survivability, Evasive Maneuver and Quick Recovery. Tavern drinks. Now, I'm not saying you have to take these. I'm just saying there's something to consider outside of the norm. And by norm, I mean you're always either going to take Sweet Pancakes or Bishop's Blessed Bread. And you typically take Stinging Curse if you want to avoid taking a whole crap ton of curse. Maybe even that whole Enduring Light for the curse as well. But if you're interested in maybe something a little different, you may want to look at the Impetuous Apprentice. Plus 25% cast speed and minus 25% reduced spell cooldowns, plus 10% spell mana cost. Great if you're spamming your Spirit Wolves on your Beastmaster. That way you can just continuously just pelt enemies with your Spirit Wolves. One thing to consider. This Ambitious Adept, plus 25% spell crit chance, plus 20% spell mana cost. Again, your mana is going to take a hit doing this, but if you have good mana regen via your Sorcerer title, or through maybe gear or other, maybe you put some points into focus, you may want to consider some extra spell crit chance, just to make your Spirit Wolves hit a little bit harder. And then lastly, I've never done this, but if you're a Marksman, maybe the extra weapon speed might be good, and if you're good at dodging, and you're good at if you're quick, if you are very dexterous or whatever, you may want to consider Barking Mad. You'll take more damage, but your weapon speed will be faster. I couldn't do this if I wanted to. The Ranger doesn't have enough survivability with Marksman, and on top of that, I'm not that quick. my aching bones can't handle it. So it might be something to consider, but I typically don't use that. When it comes to weapon mastery, this is one that I would consider doing. I've actually put points into crossbows because I use the crossbows heavily. Even when I'm running Beastmaster and spamming Spirit Wolves, I still use my crossbow. And I do need a fair bit of damage, so I still try to level that. So if you're running Marksman and, by extension, bows, you'll definitely want to put points into bows to increase that damage, because you're going to be relying on a lot of weapon damage when you're running Marksman. And you'll see why in a minute. But crossbows, on the other hand, that's typically an offhand. It's not going to do as much damage, but I still threw points in here just to keep my main hand damage somewhat consistent and slightly improved. But again, most of my damage goes to my spell power. So consider the crossbows if you're playing Warden or Beastmaster. Definitely consider bows if you're playing Marksman. Now, I've mentioned titles before in other videos, so I'll just quickly mention it here. The Ranger grants weapon power at 3 per level. So the more you level your Ranger, the more weapon power that you're given to everyone else. I have to stress, though, that spell power is typically favored, so that's why I've been leveling my Wizard more so than my Ranger. I really don't use my main hand weapon for damage like I do spells and skills and the like. That being said, if you are one of those people that love using your main hand weapon, then you'll want to level the Ranger. Especially if you're using the Marksman spec on your Ranger. You're going to want all the weapon power you can get. So let's talk a little bit about basic skills and which ones I recommend leveling. Marked Shot. That gives you the bow tag, physical tag, and the spell tag. So anytime you get a buff for one of those 3 tags, it will affect Marked Shot. And again, that is tied to those other abilities I was recommending earlier, where if, something dies when you've got it marked, then you'll get some mana and health regen. That's good. So Marked Shot, highly recommend you max that out. I mean, the amount of damage it does when it's maxed out, plus 20% damage. I think that's extremely important, and you can blow up bosses a lot faster that way. Rhythm has just the passive ability or tag, and I recommend this anyway because it does give weapon crit chance, and then weapon crit chance per stack, and then weapon crit damage per stack. So all in all, like when it comes to weapon crit chance and damage, you're going to get a lot of damage out of that. It's consistent, and the more crits you can do, the better. So Rhythm, I highly recommend maxing that out as well. Survivalist, again, unless you're playing Warden, you're not going to have a lot of survivability, so, anything that you can do to reduce damage taken, which is what this one does, I think that's super important. Now, we're missing a main skill here, and the reason for that, there's a trap that you can get. I completely respect my tree and just did not take it. There's a talent that you can take early on, and I don't know if you can see that with the way my screen is. No, you can't. Let me go ahead and move this over real quick. There we go. And I hover over that. Trap. It's physical and it's a spell. So it does use spell power. It just throws a trap that deploys after a brief duration. It does inflict cripple and damage in an area. I find that my skill points are better placed somewhere else. So I would level everything except for the trap, but that's just me. All right. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the classes, and we'll start with Warden. So this is my primary spec that I run with when I want to XP farm or do some resource farming. I love the ability to clear out mobs. Both of these are amazing. The Entangle ability is a large area of effect. It just puts all these vines around you. And as I was kind of indicating before, there's an upgrade that you can take called Healing Wisps that will heal you for like 2, 4, 6% of your health. It doesn't say of your health, but I'm pretty sure that's what it implies. So that actually scales. So the higher your health, the more that Healing Wisps is effective. So if you're going to run Warden on a regular basis, you may want to consider enchanting your gear to give yourself a lot of vitality and thus survivability. So that, I think, is a great spec. I love Warden. I'm loving it more and more. And this Wind Reaver is also amazing. Now, I did some testing with this just to see, but it says passive, and it says weapon hits unleash gusts of wind in a forward direction dealing physical damage. Even though there's a weapon tag in there, that whirlwind is actually spell power damage. I did some testing and I ran the numbers, and I'll show you that in a minute. So that is a spell power thing, not a weapon damage thing, just so you're aware. Even though it says weapon hits unleash a gust of wind. So you'll do regular weapon damage, and then the gust of wind will do spell power damage. It's good, and it clears out a lot of stuff. Let me tell you, it's actually more powerful than I thought it was going to be. So Warden, definitely one of my favorites. It does physical. There's a lot of physical tags here as well. A lot of your ranger stuff does physical damage via the tags. So highly recommend anything that buffs physical damage that you can find is something that you'll want to look for, trinket wise, whatever the case may be. Now, the Beastmaster, on the other hand, I enjoy this one as well. It's the one I NG push with because I love spamming Spirit Wolves. And it does physical, ice, and spell, which it does your spell damage. So the main thing here is keeping your mana up and keeping your cooldowns low, your spell cooldowns low, so that you can spam the crap out of them and just continuously blow things up. The Wolf Companion is nice, and it's worth mentioning, like the Warlock, Fiends, and the Gargoyle, its attacks do spell power damage, not main hand weapon damage. Just, again, it's something that you should be aware of. So when you buff your spell power, your Wolf Companion's actually going to get stronger. Yeah, it's crazy. And the reason I don't have any points in here, because I didn't bother, when I changed my class, I didn't bother to, or my spec, I didn't bother to go to the trainer up there but these are always maxed out. So if you're gonna run this, max out these two things. Same with your Warden. Max these two things out. They're super important. So I run the Beastmaster whenever I'm NG pushing, typically, and I think it's great too because with the Beastmaster, your Wolf Companion is a great distraction for curse givers. So I can typically get through a run without getting too much curse because there are other targets for these curse enemies to go after. Now, my least favorite is the Marksman, and I know I'll probably get a lot of flack for that. But there's something extremely important that you need to know about the Marksman. The movement speed penalty for using bow skills is reduced, and you deal increased damage with bow skills. Emphasis on bow. If you go into your inventory and take a look at crossbows, there is no bow tag on that. There's weapon, ranged, and physical, but there's no bow tag. So crossbows do not scale with the Marksman archery ability. Here, you've got the crushing Wormwood bow of... I know you can't see it, but you can see the tag. It says bow on it. Quick shot and power shot both say bow. So when you're taking this particular class promotion, the Marksman, and then for the archery, you want a bow. Not a crossbow, you want a bow. And I have to warn you, this is very click heavy. Very click heavy. Left, I think it's like hold in right click while multiply, just clicking left, or holding in left and spamming right. I don't remember how it works, but you can get both going, like both left and right clicks going, and do a lot. You can blow things up with it, don't get me wrong, but it destroys my arthritis and my tendonitis in my wrists, and I can't with the Marksman. I really can't. And the Rain of Arrows takes a little bit of finesse to use. Sometimes I don't always hit my target, and it's just frustrating. It does damage, don't get me wrong. It's physical, it does spell damage, it's good, and it has the bow tag, so it's going to do even more damage, but it's hard for me to land sometimes. So Marksman, even though it's a powerful class, I think it's more of a skill-based class, and it's one that you'll want to, that's going to be a weapon damage focus. Yes, definitely keep your spell power up because of your spells and the like, but weapon damage and bows together, you're going to want to try and focus a lot on weapon damage and spell power damage. And how much you put into each will ultimately be up to you. But I would consider the bow or the Marksman for people that like high skill builds, that don't have a problem with their wrists and getting tendonitis and aches and pains in their body. Like, if you're fine with that, if you're fine with a high skill class, then Marksman can do some damage, but it does take some finesse. So I prefer personally, I prefer the Warden for XP clearing and grinding and resource grinding. And then I prefer Beastmaster for NG pushing, but, take the one that you like. Now, Excel, my dear old friend, I just figured I'd show you some of the numbers in case you were curious. Wind Reaver, I did mention earlier that, it says weapon hits unleash a gust of wind. Well, those gusts of winds are spell power, and I calculated that. So I was hitting the dummy, and you have to make sure that, you're hitting one dummy and being far enough away from the second one to where only the gust of wind hits the second dummy, and that's the damage that you use because your shots do penetrate targets. But anyway, I hit the dummy with the gust of wind for 266. The tooltip there says 60. My spell power at the time was 226%. So that's 226% of 60, and that's 135.6. Now, another thing to keep in mind, again, physical damage is incredibly important for a ranger because a lot of things are affected by it. So with 116% physical damage, I added another 69.6 to the 60. 116% of 60 is 69.6. Add these three together and you get that 265.20, which is fairly close to 266. I'm happy enough with that. There was some armor pen in there too, if that matters. Whatever. To me, that's close enough. So gust of wind is separate from weapon damage, and it doesn't actually tie to the weapon used. So if you use a bow versus a crossbow, it's still going to be based on spell power, so this really doesn't matter. You don't need a strong bow for Wind Reaver to be more powerful. Wind Reaver is going to be the same damage because it operates on spell power and not your weapon damage. So regardless of what weapon you use, it's not going to matter. So use a crossbow, in my opinion. It's just easier for me on the wrist. And then getting back to the whole wolf companion, whether or not it does weapon damage or spell, here's another example of how that works out. My wolf companion was hitting the dummy for 621 a hit. The tooltip says 140. My spell power is 226. And again, physical damage, it says, it doesn't have a tag, but it does say in the description, it does physical damage. And I think the developers need to do a better job with these tags because that physical should really be up there where passive is. But in order to get the numbers to work out, I had to take 116% of 140 and then add these three together to get 618.80. And again, there may have been some other factors. I'm not going to get too deep into the math here. I'm just simply proving that spell power is the driving factor here when it comes to the wolf attacking things. And there you have it, a quick look at the Ranger class. Keep in mind, I am not an expert at it. I only know what I know because I've been using it and playing it for so long. But that being said, I don't know everything. So if you have a tip or two, leave them in the comments below. And if you have a question about how something works, like, how do the specializations work? What does the Ranger's abilities look like? I've got a ton of videos in the below description. Check those out, please. NG pushing, general tips, whole bunch of stuff. Just check out the other guides if you're having trouble or if you're new to the game. This is Vince. Thanks for watching. I'll catch y'all next time. Take care.